All right. Hi, everybody, and thanks for joining us today's session. So for those of you who have forgotten why you even signed up to be here today, we're here to discuss the advantages of being able to build security into your change processes to be able to create a more secure and more agile SAP systems, which we think is a pretty exciting topic. So I'll start by introducing myself. My name's Daniel Clark, and I've been working as the Rev-Trac partner manager for going on 2 years now. And I also have the job, or should I say pleasure, of facilitating today's session and introducing our two main speakers. So first up, next to me, we have Chris Drake. So Chris Drake is the CTO at Rev-Trac. He's been working with us for over 15 years now, and he has experience in being able and helping to create and implement the change processes in some of the world's largest and most complex SAP users. And we've also been working closely with Rob Tyler from Turnkey Consulting as well recently. So Rob is the cybersecurity director at Turnkey in Australia, and he also has over 15 years of experience in being able to help create or improve organizations' security practices. So today's session is broken into three main categories. So first of all, we'll be hearing from Chris Drake about what it is that Rev-Trac actually does and why a SAP change management tool has even been invited to a security-focused event. And then we're going to be opening it up to more of a podcast-style Q&A session where I'll be posing some questions to each of our main presenters today, and I'll be asking them to respond to them from each of their own unique perspectives. And then I will be giving you a bit of a visual demonstration to be able to, I guess, visually represent some of the concepts that we'll be talking about today. And then ultimately, we'll open it up to a Q&A session. So without any further ado, I'll hand it over to Chris Drake now. Chris.
Thanks, Daniel. So I'm going to give an introduction of Rev-Trac, what it is we do in the market, how we communicate out to our customers. So firstly, who we are. Revelation Software Concepts is the name of the company. Rev-Trac is the product and the business line that focuses on SAP change management. We're founded in 1997, and we're sitting in Melbourne in Australia. So we've been an SAP partner since 2002. We've got over 220 customers. We focus on SAP change governance, compliance, and where possible, automation. And of course, this is very much fitting into DevOps. And we're looking at ourselves these days as actually a platform to deliver SAP DevOps. So globally adopted in APAC, some familiar brands. These are some of the larger organizations, and we find the bigger the problem, the more likely they are to find Rev-Trac as a suitable solution. United States, this is probably our main market, actually, despite us being based in APAC. Really the bigger companies with the bigger problems, and therefore the bigger demand for these types of solutions tend to be in the US. We've also got a good presence in EMEA and globally, and we're finding this to be an expanding market, one that's starting to gain a little more traction today. So some of the traditional benefits of Rev-Trac, and often this is where people speak to me who have been using Rev-Trac for sometimes decades, they understand the typical use cases. So we're here to reduce manual effort, try to implement change delivery continuity, and of course, mitigate risks and accelerate projects. Now, the way we do this, of course, is really fundamentally at transport management. We put process around transports. We then allow for a change process to be controlled, to be tuned up by the business, have the right people approving things at the right time, and put conditions around how changes can progress. And then, of course, ultimately give fully qualified, fully tested, suitable changes ready for deployment within a release, waterfall, when ready, any type of approach for ultimately delivering them safely into production. So this is a very involved slide, but it's how we're sort of seeing ourselves fit in the new world. Obviously, the landscape's changing. Cloud is now a new, very common terminology within an SAP landscape. But at the core of all of these SAP systems is still ABAP. Okay, it's a NetWeaver system. These days it's S4, but we're seeing ECC customers plug BTP and other cloud technologies, sometimes even into older solutions. So we're very much talking about 3 steps to SAP DevOps. At the bottom, what you're seeing is what I would consider the typical Rev-Trac value proposition. It's getting that ABAP core under control, putting a rigid yet precise process around how you are delivering change across the landscape, making sure conditions are met before things are progressing to their subsequent environment, and ultimately trying to get all of the problems detected as early as possible. The workflow is based in ABAP, so it's inserted and imported into the S4 or ECC systems, and this is where the brain of Rev-Trac ultimately lives. So that's what we consider the first step to achieving SAP DevOps, is getting a CI/CD approval workflow for your ABAP change. The second step is now acknowledging that ABAP isn't the only thing in the SAP landscape these days. BTP is obviously the very emerging part of the SAP landscape. And of course, we see things like SuccessFactors, Ariba, and even now as we work more into the cloud world, dependencies and microservices that might exist on AWS or a hyperscaler. These need to be accounted for when it comes to delivering SAP projects and delivering SAP change. So step 2 is about now plugging in these cloud solutions into your workflow process and making sure you have a unified approach to delivering change across your landscape, making sure that sometimes changes can impact ABAP, BTP, and a little bit of hyperscaler. They should be managed as a unit of work and together so that dependencies and conditions are being met and ultimately consolidated. The third step is where we've had a lot more experience recently, actually, which is around integration. So we want to see best of breed ALM solutions being brought into the change delivery process. So test automation, code analysis, which we'll discuss today, document management, anything that might impact a change or need to be called, we can build it into an enforced process so that ultimately you're experiencing as much automation as possible, and getting a unified approach to orchestrating your SAP DevOps. So these are our 3 steps to SAP DevOps. Step 1 is get your core under control. Step 2, unify your solutions. And step 3, orchestrate with best of breed solutions. Here is an example of what we call the DevOps toolchain. So it is becoming a more accepted terminology within the market, but this is the concept of basically having every one of your application lifecycle management tools automatically called and engaged with at the appropriate time. This is an example of what an SAP ABAP toolchain might look like. And here we're seeing, for example, you might start things out in ServiceNow or Sherwell, where the IT help desk has a look at the change, identifies it as SAP, and then delivers the change off to ultimately the SAP IT team to resolve the issue or to implement some sort of an enhancement. This is when Rev-Trac's engaged. And in the middle here, you can see it's basically handling the progression of the change and the approvals and the governance, auditing, and compliance. Then we're using best of breed tools, so document repositories, to make sure that we have the right specifications, the right information upfront as we can progress that change. Jira, of course, backlog management, timing, assessments of estimates, things like this can be engaged, and we can make sure that people are using the right tools at the right time. Automatic code review, Onapsis is one we've got quite a bit of experience with. ABAP Test Cockpit, we can engage with them at the right time, making sure that we're not allowing changes to progress unless they have met the right thresholds or quality controls that we want to see. Impact analysis, automated testing, these can all be called at the right time and hopefully try and bring the feel of automation as much as possible. I mean, in the ideal world, what you want is a developer to plug in what they have, run an analysis with the right tools engaged. You can basically have it ready for production and ready to be applied into the production instance or contained with the release with just a single click. That would be the dream. We're not there, but of course, with the right tools and the right principles in place, you can work towards this. And we believe at Rev-Trac, as the SAP DevOps platform, we're helping organizations to step closer and closer to that dream of automation. That's my intro to Rev-Trac. I will now move to the next session, which is, of course, the discussion. So, Daniel.
All right, well, thanks for that overview, Chris. You've done a good job being able to squeeze 25 years of product development and innovation into an 8-minute talking slot.
Thanks, mate.
So I guess that brings us to our next section, as Chris said, which is the Q&A session. So I'll dive straight into it. And Rob, first question is for you. So we've obviously heard a lot about change requirements that are unique to SAP and how Rev-Trac is helping to modernize that approach. But obviously your focus is primarily on security. So what are you seeing that, what are the challenges that you see are specific to the SAP world?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. So I guess there are a lot of close ties between change management and security. So first of all, the sheer complexity of SAP makes it critical to understand and control change. And that same complexity dictates also the need to understand security risk. So one of the key areas of security risk is custom code, and particularly at the core, as Chris mentioned earlier. So most of that written in ABAP. So in a recent SORG survey, we learned that for about 50% of organisations, their critical custom code is about 6 years old or older. So we can probably assume that most of that code is somewhat older than 6 years old, and most organisations can probably attest to that. So this would, compare to say non-SAP code, which is typically being developed much more recently. And we know that coding practices over the past, say, 6 to 10 years have certainly improved a lot. At least awareness of the need for secure code. So custom code being one of those key challenges.
All right, thanks, Rob. So obviously updating and modernizing your code base is a very hot topic now in the SAP world. So maybe Chris, what are some of the best practice principles that you're seeing some of our customers adopting right now?
Yeah, good question. So within change management, we have, and within Rev-Trac, we have a lot of safety checks that we like to be able to do because we understand that the earlier you can discover an error, the cheaper it is to resolve the error. So if you're discovering things in QA, it becomes a little bit more expensive. You have more people with eyes on the change. You've had more people engaging with it. And then when that rejection happens in QA, ultimately, it's more expensive. Now you've got to go back to the developer. There might be time that's passed. That's exponentiated again when you start doing this in pre-production. And then really, if you're finding these problems in production, that's what you're trying to avoid altogether. That can be downtime, outages, and then obviously within the world of security, that's unacceptable. So the key within change management is really find all of the problems in dev. Do it upfront, enforce it if you can, and put some parameters in place so that it's not even possible to allow your developers to be exiting code and progressing code outside of your dev systems unless it's meeting your quality controls and parameters. So the earlier the better. It's a concept called shifting left, and that's putting as much emphasis on doing the checks and balances with as few eyes as possible, impacting and working on that change before discovering those errors.
Rob, do you have anything more to add to that?
Yeah, I think I guess I agree with all that. So I guess the other important consideration from security is that we need that visibility into the code as well, which from a security perspective. So we need to understand what is the security risk of that code that is a particular concern at the time. So this is incorporating it into the dev and change process is certainly important.
Excellent. Well, I guess the key question now is how do we combine the best of both worlds in a sense and being able to incorporate SAP security into the change management process?
Yeah, well, I guess this is really the principle behind DevSecOps, which is mentioned earlier. So, and this is where we include security review and checks within that dev and change process. So at the time of deploying, we have a view on what is the likely risk of that code. So security checks involves applying tooling that can understand security or insecure code development practices. Now, obviously, this is an ideal time. Firstly, the code module in question is known, so the criticality of that piece of code and the purpose is is known. So that's important in terms of assessing risk. Also, the code is now familiar to the developer. So they've either just recently written this or it's recently been updated by the developer. So they understand the code. And one of the other key kind of, I guess, flow-on benefits is that it's a very effective way of improving the awareness of secure coding practices. So if the developer is immediately made aware that there's something that's been developed which is not necessarily best coding practice from a security perspective, it's indicated so the vulnerability is pointed out, and they're also shown, I guess, an example of how else to write that code in a more secure way. So it's far more effective than perhaps undertaking security review at a later stage. As Chris mentioned, the further down or the further down the timeline, the more expensive and harder it is to change. So much easier if the developer at the time, which is familiar, is reviewing that. The worst case would be someone else trying to review that code later on without the same context. So I guess the other consideration is that not all code can be resolved at the time. Not all security vulnerabilities can be resolved, but that the visibility into that security vulnerability and the risk is at least understood. It's noted, and there's a plan to manage that risk.
Excellent. I did pick up on a term you used there, which was iterative improvements. So I know this is a really common theme that we're seeing in the change management world as well, Chris. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, for sure. So where we're working obviously right now is digital transformation. We've got a lot of existing customers and a lot of new customers that will bring in Rev-Trac because they recognize the challenges associated with going from ECC to S4. S4 is obviously this new code base provided by SAP that's modern. It's meant to be more web-based. It's meant to be using the BTP for its extensibility. And therefore, it's quite a transformative process. It's called a digital transformation a lot of the time. And what we tend to do with organizations is say, get ready for this. There's some good safety checks, code analysis checks that we can do within an ECC environment in preparation for an S4 digital transformation. So you can enforce this behavior for incremental improvements of code as you're preparing for this S4 system to become ready. We know that about 40% of the custom code inside of an ECC system is going to be going to S4. Okay, it's the most critical code. It's the one that gives businesses competitive advantage. And it's also the code that's most frequently changed. And that's just the reality. Your valuable code needs minor tweaking and adjustments. Now, if you're preparing for that digital transformation and the shift to S4, you can start preparing code modernization prior to even having the S4 systems available by doing the right checks. And what we're encouraging organizations to do is use a threshold of acceptable code modernization within each change. This has the approach of then micro adjustments, which are the cheapest way to do this, rather than having a giant project to let's modernize all of our code because we have to get ready for this S4 next week. Rather, just incrementally add it into the culture of the organization to say, we're going to be improving our code. We're going to get it ready for this S4. This will improve the chances of a successful brownfield implementation. Okay, when that code is ready and already compatible for S4 before that system even becomes available, it makes the job of performing that digital transformation much simpler. Now, the same principles should be applied for security enhancements. If you can do micro adjustments as you're making change to your already existing code, you're really reducing the effort and you're preparing yourself for a more secure future, but also for a more likely transformation. And that means the onus can be done in small doses and kind of embedded within your day-to-day business as usual, rather than having to set up a big, expensive project, which could ultimately fail or just not be achieved in time or be done a little bit, without consideration. So we really like the approach of micro adjustments and, of course, an appreciation that the work can be done beforehand in small doses to ultimately deliver a successful outcome at a later stage.
Excellent, thanks. Well, we do actually have a very, very brief conceptual presentation that I guess demonstrates some of the concepts that we've been talking about so far in today's session.
Could we get that slide up and we'll just run through, I guess, what we see to be the solution. I'm going to run through, I guess, a diagram we prepared here. This is sort of how Rev-Trac is engaging developers when it comes to DevOps. And you can see we try to be as out of the way as possible, but ultimately run checks to make sure that they're delivering in accordance with the guiding principles for how an organization wants development done. What we see is just part of the standard dev checks that are being performed. We insert security checks, and that's a condition before a transport can be released and before we can then send that into the QA system. So this is our interpretation of DevSecOps and how we can help deliver that. Daniel, I'll hand over to you for the process walkthrough.
Yes, thanks, Chris. So I guess for this, we're creating a conceptual demonstration of how this process works. We could very well provide a live demonstration straight out of the SAP GUI, but those of you who are familiar with the SAP GUI understand it's not the most visually appealing sort of thing to look at, particularly if you're not a developer. So we've got a marketing team to put together something a little prettier. So I'm sure we're all familiar with the DevOps infinity loop. So we're going to be particularly focusing on the plan, code, and build stages, and emphasizing how Rev-Trac's workflow engine could build security into the development process, even from those very early stages. So to begin with, we're starting out in the plan phase. So obviously, once a business determines that a change is required, it usually starts out in a servicing tool like Snow or Jira or Sherwell. And then it is handed to Rev-Trac to make sure that it is delivered through a compliant workflow process. So you can see on the screen now, we've got a very simplified workflow process in stage. But importantly, you can see that code vulnerability is actually included in that process before a change can be determined ready for production. So looking at the code phase now, so this is really where all the magic happens. So once a change goes to the status of in progress, the developer will receive a notification letting them know it's their time to shine and asking them to start coding the change that is required. So you can see here we're working out of an SE80 transaction so that the developer has either picked up a bug and fixed it out of the existing code or has created his own code as well. But either way, what isn't known to him is it actually contains a lot of vulnerabilities. These are, as I said, these are ones that he may have accidentally included himself, or they may have actually just picked up some existing code and not actually thought to check to see if it contained vulnerabilities, which is, as I'm probably sure we're all aware, how most developers work. So the developer, believing their work is done, they activate the change, and then they send it to the next step in our workflow process, which is to take it to that code vulnerability analysis. So we're moving into code analysis. So one of the tools that we have integrations with runs through the code, and it has identified that there is a high impact security issue. So then what Rev-Trac will do is Rev-Trac will interpret those results, realize that this is not a safe transport to be able to progress, and will instead actually reject it from this stage and send it back to the status of in progress. We'll automatically notify the developer again, letting them know that there's still work to be done on the change that they're working on. Send it back to them with the report so that they're aware of what actually needs to be able to change and where the vulnerabilities exist so that they can address them then and there before we even see it go on into that quality assessment stage. So now the developer does their work, fixes up all the vulnerabilities, activates it again, and this time once we go through that code vulnerability analysis, we get an all green lights and it's a pass, which is the exact response we were looking for. Now that we've got that, we can be certain that all of the code that we're working on presently is secure, that we're not introducing any vulnerabilities into production. And then ultimately, we're able to move to that build stage, and so that all the changes that we're building into that release, we know that it's vulnerability free, which is a huge win. So even though that was a very brief presentation, we've been able to achieve quite a few things there. So first of all, we've commenced the change lifestyle via synchronized systems. So regardless of whether the change starts in ServiceNow, Jira, Sherwell, it's been handed to Rev-Trac to manage the entire change process. And then Rev-Trac will also automatically keep those systems in sync the entire time. We've enforced a compliant workflow. So this has been pre-configured, pre-approved, and all the right steps are in place so it's in line with the business requirements. We've also started to adopt a shift-left mentality so that issues can be rectified at the earliest possible stages before they're even introduced into QA. We've engaged the safety checks automatically. So this means that only promoting secure code becomes almost like an unconscious practice. We're seeing some cross-department collaboration. So we're seeing the development team starting to automatically adopt more of a security mindset. We're seeing fast issue resolution. So the issues that were present in that code have been picked up and worked on at the earliest possible time. And then once they were secured, we're seeing fast, very rapid deployment of those changes into production. So that's just a very, very quick overview. Obviously, once it's in practice, it gets a lot more complex than that. And people like Chris or some of our other consultants and people with Turnkey actively work with our accounts to be able to work with them to find an exact process that suits their needs. So with that being said, I will open it up to the questions phase now of our webinar. So I can see that a question's been sent through. The question is, how do you differentiate if an ABAP code vulnerability was recently or has been in the SAP system for a while?
That's a pretty good question. The vulnerability checks, to my understanding, are being done in the exact moment. So I don't believe it's something you're going to be able to easily assess within the context of change management as to when it was introduced, just the fact that it is there as part of that change. So if you're deploying your code, you've made a modification and it's picking up old or new vulnerabilities, Rev-Trac and the code solution at the moment of time in the change management is simply going to give you a binary sort of response. It's there or not there. Now, Rob might speak more specifically to a security vulnerability solution, because my understanding is building it into change management process is one approach, but these solutions are a lot more advanced and vast in their capability. So, Rob, I might hand it off to you.
Yeah. So the simple answer is you probably won't know, right? Unless the developer can provide that insight. But I guess the broader point is that we're iteratively addressing security in the code base by when a code has been updated, a module of code has been updated, then that module, not just the code that's been written or updated, the whole module is being reviewed, and that way we're iteratively addressing code vulnerabilities. So it probably doesn't really matter whether it was just been done at that exact point in time. I guess the key is that we're starting to work through these security vulnerabilities, and I guess the other point is it's that secure coding practices shouldn't be a kind of a name and shame of developers, right? We're all kind of creatures of habit. We've been doing coding a certain way, and it's not until we've had it pointed out to us that there's a vulnerability, and here's an alternative way to do it. So this is all about that learning and adapting to new secure coding practices.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what you're saying there as well with regards to sort of naming and shaming, that's a really tough thing to sort of, have a culture, but it needs to be in a culture of accountability. And I think within change management, everything we're doing in Rev-Trac, it's a digital signature. Okay, and we often tell people, don't sign this unless you're happy to wear the consequences. It's not a matter of naming and shaming, but this is an auditing system. You need to be accountable or aware that there's risks associated. What we're trying to do is make an awareness of the risks, and then ultimately we still have to give individuals the right to understand it and make conscious decisions. Now, whether that vulnerability's been there for a decade and you're really just allowing for it to continue, or whether that vulnerability has been introduced today, those are really things you could work it out with version management and all sorts of other fun stuff. But at the end of the day, the idea would be accountable. And also, as an organization, have acceptable thresholds. So if you're gearing up for your S4 digital transformation, we might say, 2 months out, we have zero tolerance for any code that is not super modernized and has zero security risks. But when you're 2 years out from your digital transformation, you might have a higher threshold of tolerance. We haven't plugged this into S4 yet. We're not exposed to cybersecurity as much as we might have been when it was an ECC system that's less web connected. The modernization of the code is not required today because we're still 2 years out from really cutting over to S4. So I think the concept is really understanding the willingness to have thresholds and where you are in your project, and reduce those acceptable thresholds as you get closer to being at a point where you want to be.
Okay. Thanks, Chris. I'm just very mindful of time. I think our session is already run over. So I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. This has obviously been a very brief introduction about the DevSecOps solution that Rev-Trac and Turnkey are offering together. So if you would like to know more or start exploring what DevSecOps could look like within your systems, I do invite you to reach out to either Chris or us at Rev-Trac or Turnkey directly as well, because it is an exciting conversation to have, and I think it's one that's becoming very timely in our markets today. So thank you, everyone. I hope you took something out of this, and I hope you stick around for the next session and continue to enjoy the session today.
Thanks a lot, Rob, for joining us.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Alice.